Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside, you find a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and is Understood Betsy like a sequel to that TV show Ugly Betty from a few years ago? In a corner, by the fire, are four people. One of them is saying, I saw an episode of that once, but I'm not sure how the book's related. And that's me, Matthew Mellema, your co-host. And welcome to Believe to See. We are a podcast of the Anselm Society's Arts Guild. Anselm Society is a coalition of churches across the Front Range of Colorado dedicated to one very simple mission, a renaissance of the Christian imagination. One of the ways we're doing that this year is through a series called Why We Create. It is a series exploring our place in the creator's masterpiece. It's our place whether you are a writer, a painter, or just someone who loves consuming and talking about good art. We're doing this by each month focusing on a single idea and really camping there. The month of May, our idea is enchantment. So you're going to see a book chapter written by one of our very distinguished faculty. The faculty include Hans Boersma, Anthony Esselin, Jessica Hooten-Wilson, and Peter Lightheart, and edited by our very own Jane Sharl. So keep a lookout for the different ways you can explore these ideas with us at anselmsociety.org. And while you're doing stuff, why not rate and review the show? We really appreciate it. Speaking of rating and reviewing the show, increasing our show's visibility, I have good news for our guests about increased visibility. They have been on our show before, several months, maybe a year or so ago, talking about it when their publishing company was just getting off the ground. And at the time, when I was doing a Google search for Bandersnatch, I had to sift through some stuff because there's an episode of Black Mirror called Bandersnatch that was throwing things off. But now, when I was Googling them for ahead of this episode, they come out number one. So, hey, the search engine optimization is going great. Things are going good. I'm really psyched to hear what they have to say. And it's the folks at Bandersnatch Books. Welcome to the podcast, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Well, before we get going, did you notice the Bandersnatch Black Mirror problem early on in your company? And have you noticed that you guys have been solving it?
Well, I would like to say that 100% of the people that search us up are going to find us as one of their top front page results. And it's probably true that we will be for a lot of folks, but I hate to say this, since you searched us already in the past, your Google knows your search habits, and so it is going to return us a little higher for you personally than the average person, but we're just going to pretend that it's like that for everyone.
Well, dang it, thought I was delivering good news, but I'm just showing my own ignorance of search engine optimization. But thank you. It's still, you all are doing great. So why don't you each take a turn and introduce yourself, talk about your role within Bandersnatch Books.
So I'm Carrie Givens, and I am the CEO of Bandersnatch Books. And we were sharing recently kind of what we all do, and our jobs are a little bit of a mix, but I wind up in a lot of the communications and logistics and planning and all of that for everything that we're doing.
All right. Well, welcome, Carrie. And now let's keep on marching down the line.
All right. My name is Rachel Donahue. I am the Chief Creative Officer of Bandersnatch Books. I'm also a homeschool mom, and I do catalog design work for our family's greenhouse business, so I wear a lot of hats. But most of my work for Bandersnatch Books falls in the creative side of things, some editing, definitely polishing off our manuscripts. Taking something that's really good and making it great is just my passion. And also some of our visual design of a lot of our images for the website and social media and things like that.
All right. And I will say Chief Creative Officer is a very cool title. That's the one I think everyone would be fighting for.
Thanks. I rather enjoy it.
And I am Annie Beth Donahue. Yes, I am related to Rachel, if no one knows that.
Not by blood, though.
Right. And I am the business officer, so I do all the boring stuff.
All that boring, important stuff.
we all work together on the creative aspects of the business. So that's that's not completely true that I do all the boring stuff, but I do mostly focus on things like finances and what we were talking about, SEO, running ads, things like that, the back end stuff.
All right, great. And again, y'all have been on the show before, but for those who may not have had a chance to listen to the first one, can you give us like the elevator pitch for what the mission of Bandersnatch Books is? And judging by the job descriptions, I'm guessing, Carrie, this is your wheelhouse.
Sure, we'll call it my wheelhouse. Yes, yeah. So Bandersnatch Books is a small press publisher, and our goal is to publish books that we find off the beaten path. And so we are looking for those books that would be lost in the world of publishing for one reason or another. They may not fit into the right categories, or they may be an author and an illustrator coming together instead of one bringing, their manuscript and a publisher looking for an illustrator, things like that. And then the other piece of that is that we are looking for books that are true, beautiful, and good, and trying to find those things that are going to celebrate those qualities.
All right. And I really encourage listeners to just get on Bandersnatch Books' website. Pretty soon you'll get, your Google will learn what my Google has, and you'll find it super easy. But you can go through, they've been expanding with different titles. They really have a lot in the hopper, and it's really exciting. You can definitely see how that theme is played out. But the main reason I wanted y'all on the show today is because you have a new project that y'all are launching that I am very excited about, and that is Bandersnatch Classics, where you're taking older books that are, they were published in the past. They're now out of print in the public domain, and you're sort of breathing new life into them. So my first question is whose idea it was. I'm going to see if I can guess based on the job descriptions. Rachel, was this yours as Chief Creative Officer? Was this your idea?
Actually, no. I think this goes back to a longtime dream of Carrie's.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, Carrie, tell us where this idea came from.
Yeah, I'd say we were talking before we got on the podcast that in terms of for Bandersnatch, it really has been something we've dreamed of since the very beginning. As soon as we started talking about making Bandersnatch Books and doing what we're doing, we thought this is a great avenue. And it for a couple of reasons, and we can talk about those. But in terms of the origin story of it, I love old books, and especially within children's literature, you have sort of the golden age of children's literature, which is the back end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. And in the last 20 years, a lot of those books have come into the public domain. So suddenly there's this wealth of fantastic books that are available in the public domain, which just opens a lot of opportunity and also opens a lot of concern for not great quality out there. And so that's sort of where the root was what if you had books that were sort of curated, selected and then presented beautifully. And that's sort of the source idea. And I can let Rachel and Annie Beth can talk more about where we've honed that and what some of the benefits are.
Yeah, I can speak just from, I enjoy the tactile experience of books. And so just deeply appreciating beautiful books. And I actually own a series that have been put out by Barnes and Noble that are reprints of classics, but they're the classics that are already in print that you can find a copy of Alice in Wonderland or Robin Hood or King Arthur or, these classic books that I don't think they've ever been out of print. And we kind of have a vision of doing the same thing, of making these beautiful books, but these lesser known titles and the first one that we're starting with, Understood Betsy, I had never even heard of until we're going to read it as part of our homeschooling. And, it was on our book list. And so I go online to try to find it, and you can get a paperback, but they're just not visually appealing. There's nothing to really give the reader in the way of like the satisfying book experience for bookish people. And because we appreciate that, I thought what if we had just a beautiful copy of this book? Because it's a fantastic book. It's one that we loved reading aloud as a family. And so I'm looking forward to being able to put some of these things in the world that, like, you can't find a beautiful copy of that book. There are 100 copies of Wind in the Willows, but there are very few of Understood Betsy, and I've never seen a beautiful one.
Yeah, so I actually did read Understood Betsy as a child and still have my 1980-something paperback copy of it. And so I was quite disappointed to learn, because I do a lot of like marketing and, like I said, finance stuff. There's this entire e-commerce system where they teach you to take these out-of-print books and basically just like throw them into a template and spit them out onto Amazon. And it's marketed as like easy, fast money. You don't have to write your own book, but you can make money on books, blah, blah, blah. And so I was a little horrified to find out that these books that I love were being turned into these, terrible money-making machines like that. And we're kind of the antidote to that, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a friend that I work with who loves poetry, and he, a couple of years ago, I walked into a meeting, and before the meeting, he goes, "Carrie, I need to show you something, and you need to explain what's going on." And he pulls this book out of his bag, and it's a book of poetry by Robert Service. The cover wasn't bad. Like, it was just a paperback book, and the cover was fine. But I open it up, and it is 12-point Calibri font, double-spaced, throughout the entire book. And there are no spaces between poems. They're like, the titles of the poems are not bold.
Oh, gosh.
The table of contents is literally just a list of poems. There's no pages listed. It's just a list of poems. And I looked at it, I'm kind of flipping through, and I go, oh, I think I know what this is. And I hop onto my computer and I pull up Project Gutenberg, and I pull up that book of poems. And in Project Gutenberg, the table of contents is hyperlinked. And so it's a list of poems, and they're all hyperlinked to the correct poem in the thing. I said, Stuart, someone came on here, copied all of this, stuck it into Microsoft Word because it's 12-point Calibri font, and put it into Amazon and published it. And he looks at me and goes, so what you're saying is I should have gotten the $10 copy, not the $4 copy. I said, you might have had better luck, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. So that's a word of warning to anyone out there who aspires to anything like self-publishing. You may think, I'll format my book on my own. Aha. No, formatting books properly is very difficult, as I'm sure you three can all attest to. And just another point along those lines, because I remember when I heard that y'all were doing Bandersnatch Classics, my first thought was, that's so cool. Then I had this other thought, like, but wait, aren't all those books free? Like, I could just Google any of these and get them all for free. But like you said, there are a lot of benefits with having someone do this the right way, because I remember for a previous show that I was doing, a previous podcast, I was reading part of Anne of Green Gables. So beforehand, I just like pull up my Kindles, like, okay, there's got to be a free Anne of Green Gables somewhere, and there were, but they have like really ugly covers. The formatting is all weird. And it's like, it's kind of weird to read words that I love in a format that seems so hasty and slapdash.
Yes.
So was that a big part of your decision to sort of do this the right way? Like, you owe it to Understood Betsy.
Yeah, because we care about the way things look. And, like you said, these words you love, it almost feels like a desecration to have it in an ugly font and in bad formatting. And so for the Bandersnatch Classics series, we actually are contracting with designer and artist John Niner to create a set of drop caps that is specifically for Bandersnatch Classics. And we're going to have, this uniform font and a uniform look. Each book will have its own particular cover design, but it will be designed in such a way that it complements the other books in the series so that they'll look good on a shelf together, because we care about these things. It's a passion of ours. And so if we appreciate these things, we know there are other people in the world who appreciate them too and will enjoy them as much as we do.
Yeah, so sorry, not to get ahead of you with the actual questions there, but I think that once again, being the details person here, that brings up an interesting point about the legalities of copywriting, something that's in the public domain. How can we actually make that our book so someone doesn't come and just snatch the Bandersnatch version of it and sell it as theirs, right?
Yeah, this is actually a point that I spend some time thinking about in my day job. I'm an attorney, and one of my grumpy old man opinions is that the copyright for old works of art is way too long. I think it's like 75 years after the author dies. It's like, that's way too long. Like, copyright is important. If people put work into this, like what you all are doing, you deserve to make money for what you're doing. And that should extend for your whole lives. But 75 years? Come on, people. Yep. But yeah, that does get into some interesting stuff. So I'm guessing you all had to make sure, like you said, with the special font designs, the special cover designs, doing all these things to really put the Bandersnatch imprint on and make it your own, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we'll have copyrightable material like that, like some specialty designed items. But the other thing that we're definitely doing is we're having people write introductions for each one of these books. And that's new material. And you may have seen the set of classics that have been being put out with Karen Swallow Prior writing an introduction and discussion questions and stuff that go with them. We thought through, do we want to go that more academic route, like approaching this work with discussion questions and stuff like that? And we decided that these are books we love. And we want to get people who love these books to write the introductions and to have that be our approach. And we may be able to develop questions, if a family wants to use them, if they're homeschooling or something like that, but we can release those as a PDF on our website. Like that doesn't need to be part of the set itself. And so we're really excited for Understood Betsy, Randall Goodgame of Slugs and Bugs. He and his son read it and loved it. And so he's planning to write our introduction for Understood Betsy. And it'll just be a short word from Randall. It's not going to be an in-depth, but it's going to tell his story of why they love this book. And we're just excited to see who else in the future, we're going to be able to invite in to writing an intro for the Bandersnatch Classics.
Yeah, that's really great. And I'm glad you brought up Karen Swallow Prior's Guides to Reading and Reflection. We actually had her on this podcast, too, to talk about them. And that's such a great project, too. And you can tell you guys are, it's so great. And I love how both of you are taking this in interesting directions, but different ones. Like you said, hers is, it's more designed for grown-up readers but she's doing the same thing with beautiful cover design. I recently got Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and I'm really, really excited to dig into it. And again, public domain, I could find it for free, but I really want to read this beautiful copy that has the extra stuff that Karen Swallow Prior did.
Yeah, I've had my eye on that book.
To do that same thing with Understood Betsy. So now let's talk about the titles themselves. So Understood Betsy is your first one, but it sounds like you have some other titles in the hopper. So as you were going through this, what was your criteria? What kind of books were you looking for?
So I think the criteria, one of the pieces was definitely the lesser known. You mentioned Anne of Green Gables. Anne of Green Gables hasn't gone out of print. You can still buy a very nice copy from, I don't know who has it these days, but, Penguin or, something like that. You can buy it from a major publisher and it's a good copy, a good edition. So we're not going to look for those ones that you can get a good copy of. We're specifically looking for the off the beaten path books, the books that are a little less well known. We definitely are looking at the homeschool standard kind of book lists or, the places where homeschool families that are following Charlotte Mason are looking for book lists, or Ambleside, or there's more that I don't remember off the top of my head. So looking at those, because clearly there's a market there, but also the ones we love, again, that's really what's at the core of this project is these are books we love. And I grew up, my mom's name is Elizabeth Ann, and in Understood Betsy, the main character, Betsy, is Elizabeth Ann. And so my mom was actually given a copy of Understood Betsy when she was the age that Betsy is in the book by her godmother, who was also Elizabeth Ann. And so that's the copy I grew up reading, was one that was printed in the 50s. And, so just that, like, I don't know, that love of the books. And so we have some ideas for other titles. We haven't 100% locked in. We want to get the first one rolling and get the project really going. But we've got some ideas and we can discuss them. We're also open to suggestions. Like, we want to hear from people. What are the books that you're really looking for?
All right, great. So which of you was the official one to say, Understood Betsy's the one we're starting with? I guessed wrong with who came up with Bandersnatch Classics. So I'm going to guess this one was Rachel? No, I guessed that last time. Annie Beth, did you come up with Understood Betsy?
No, I think it was Rachel.
I think it was.
I definitely was very excited about it. It might have been, Carrie definitely had some input because she has a lot of history with that book as well. But I had read it aloud with my boys that year, I think just in the months prior to that first discussion. And I think Carrie might have mentioned it of like this book because she knew we were reading it. And I was like, yes, absolutely. Let's do this one. And I think from that point on, it was just like, we all agreed, yes, this is a fantastic book. This is an excellent place to start. We definitely have our eye on a few other books that, we want to read through them again and just make sure that's a time consuming process because we are now busy people who are publishing books.
The double-edged sword of success. But let's talk a little bit about the plot of Understood Betsy because, like probably a lot of readers, which is why you chose it, I'd never heard of this title before. So I was doing a little bit of digging into the plot and the author, but it has, the sort of plot you see with a lot of books of the genre, but from what I've seen, it must do it really well. So give us the synopsis of what happens in Understood Betsy and why you think it's so engrossing for so many people who come across it.
Yeah, so Elizabeth Ann is a quiet little girl who lives with her aunt and cousin, I believe, two spinsterish ladies. One of them clearly was married because she has a daughter, but spinster types. And they live a very quiet life in the city and everything is orderly and everything is wonderful until one of the ladies gets ill and they have to go to the sea in order to recuperate and go to a better climate. And they can't take Elizabeth Ann with them. And so they have to send her to the Putney cousins in Vermont. And it is this horrifying thing that she is going to the Putney cousins. But she winds up going to Vermont to the most wonderful, homely family, these distant relations of hers who just welcome her in, and immediately they call her Betsy and they give her responsibilities and they teach her that she can do more than she ever thought she could do. And it is just this beautiful story of this girl blossoming in an environment of love. And my friend Sam and I talk regularly about Cousin Anne, who's one of the Putney cousins. And she's this kind of hard-nosed, direct sort of woman, and yet has the biggest heart and is such a good foil for the slightly simpering that are good women. Her original family members that took care of her were good women, but just didn't understand her. And so that's really the overarching plot of the story, and it does it beautifully.
Yeah, so that is really interesting. One of the other interesting things that I noticed about it is, you can tell, one of the story arcs that Betsy has is slowly realizing, oh, I am more capable than I thought. I can take on responsibilities. I can do things by myself. I can do this. I can do that. And when you see, I'm one of those podcast hosts that goes the extra mile. So I also read up on Dorothy Canfield, who wrote the novel. And you see, she obviously she was early 20th century, but she was, in addition to being a writer, she was an educational reformer and social activist who strongly supported women's rights, racial equality, and lifelong education. 3 for 3, all good things, Dorothy. But you can definitely see that sort of almost a feminist infusion there, where you can, maybe I'm inferring too much because I spent too much time in English course classes, but you can see like this girl going like, oh, I'm realizing how capable I can be and all this stuff, which, yeah, it's a very interesting thing to see in a book like that.
Well, I actually think you're probably right with your inferences there. And I think that those are very timely topics of the day. And I think they are also timely now as well. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a new twist on some of that as far as the independence piece goes. I think a lot of our children nowadays are lacking the opportunities to do things independently, maybe because of just, our technologically advanced and slightly hovering society that we live in now. We may not have spinster aunts, but we do have people who, can't walk down the street and go to a playground by themselves for various reasons. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. But it's just that there's kind of a lack of opportunity for children to come into that independence as early, I think, now. And so I think those messages are good today. And I'm not saying go send your children down the street by themselves, because I don't want them to be kidnapped. Please don't take that message, where it doesn't belong. But I do think they can see like, well, maybe I could, start cooking, or I could take more responsibility within my own home, or even in my own backyard, I could build something. So, there are ways to apply that now that are safe.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say like one of the things that you see in Understood Betsy is she gains that independence in the structure of a loving family. It's not the 1980s, 90s era of middle grade literature where you have the child going off and there are no parents.
She's not a latchkey kid, okay?
Right. This isn't a latchkey kid. Like, she's gaining independence, but she is living within the structure of a loving family that cares for her and takes care of her. Mm-hmm. And, so it's a really great, I love what you said, Annie Beth, there. Like, we're coming back almost to some of those themes in our families today. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will say as a parent, reading the synopsis of Understood Betsy, that kind of got me. It's like, uh-oh, am I doing too much for my kids? Because that all sounds great in theory, but then when you get to it, it's like, ooh, the independent, what? No, what if something happens? I'll just do it. So yeah, it's a good lesson for all of us.
Yes, and honestly, as a parent, sometimes it's just easier to do it ourselves because it's 3 times the work to teach them to do it. But reading a book like this is inspiring. Like as a parent, I'm reading it with my boys, and it inspires me with a vision of, oh, I could allow them the opportunity to do this chore or that chore. It's that kind of good vision of, it inspires me to be better in a way that is uplifting and not like condemning. Like, does that make sense?
No, that absolutely makes sense. And I think it'll be I think it was well chosen as the sort of first book in the Bandersnatch Classics collection here. So I want to talk about some of the books you may be considering in the future. But before we do that, I want to broaden the discussion a little bit to talk about the value of older books in general, because, part of what you're doing here with Bandersnatch Classics is these are older books. As I mentioned earlier, all their authors have been dead for at least 70 years, so they are all by definition very old books. And that goes against some assumptions we make where, all of us have a bias to some degree or another to kind of privilege the brand new stuff. So, like when I'm doing my writing, I always make a point to examine like, oh, what's the market right now, and make sure I'm keeping up with what's been recently published. And it's very easy to do that in so many ways. And especially with, a book like Understood Betsy, like it was written in, what year was it? It was 1916. So, yeah, the world was just very different back then. Writing styles are different. Different assumptions happen. So do you think there's something intrinsically valuable about reading a book that was published, over 100 years ago?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question, and I think we do think differently today. And yet people aren't so different today than they were back then. And so we give our children, when, especially because I'm reading a lot of these books aloud with our own children. And when we're reading these books aloud, we're getting a glimpse of a life that is much different than ours. And so it brings an appreciation of what we have, whether it's running water or electricity or the fact that we don't have to go out and milk the cow. It gives us an appreciation of a different way of life. And yet it also helps us to see people from the past in a light of realizing that they're not so different than we are today. We may have a different technology. We may have a different habit of life, but at the core, people are people. And so these excellent writers from the past are some of the cream of the crop of their day, but their books have just kind of fallen out of circulation as certain titles are the popular ones or are the most well-known. And then these kind of fall out of fashion, but there's still something very good and very rich. There's still good stories.
So I just recently had a middle grade book come out, novel, mystery. And one of the things that I struggled with when I was first writing it was voice. I heard a lot from editors about, what was the modern voice that people wanted to read and hear in books now. And so I did a lot of research into that, because when I first started writing, I've read a lot of old books, and I also have read a lot of British novels. And so it's kind of like my first attempts at writing kind of came out that way, old fashioned, stilted a little bit. And it wasn't bad, but it certainly wasn't like that modern middle grade voice for sure. And so what I found was, I thought at first I was not going to enjoy writing in a modern voice, but then I realized I did enjoy writing in a strong voice. And what I realized was that it's okay that the books today are written differently because it's authentic to us. It's authentic to our modern voice, right? And the older books are authentic to the people who wrote them. Like they weren't artificially written in some, fancy vocabulary or whatever. That's how people spoke or what they read back then. And so I think it's good. It also expands our vocabulary and our children's vocabulary as we read things from long ago, and we are introduced to words that maybe we don't use as frequently now, or we don't use at all now. It would be difficult if you were trying to put this into a classroom as a leveled graded reader for a classroom assignment. That's where, with once again, writing as a modern author, you have to look at like leveled reading and what's the reading level and all of that. And these books don't really fit neatly into that category, but that's okay, because it's one of those things where you can understand most of it and then get the rest from context. And I think they are best read, personally, for the average reader. I think that they're best read as read alouds or as family or school, like read together sort of things. Although if you had a precocious reader, I think that they would be fine. But yeah, just because of those factors with the vocabulary and just the sentence structure and everything.
Well, and I think between expanding, vocabulary and seeing how other people think, seeing how other people lived, we can translate that with our kids now into, okay, so here's looking back 100 years at how somebody lived. And like Rachel said, they're still people. They're still, just their life is different. Okay, so today, let's look around our communities or look around the globe and, watch the news or whatever. And guess what? There's people who are people. They have families, they have pets, they have, but their life experience is very different than mine. They might live in a different country, or they might be from a different culture. And so all of those things, I think we've seen it on the news as we've seen refugees from Ukraine and what families have brought with them. I think has been so fascinating to me to look at these pictures and see what is in people's arms or what they're pulling in their suitcases behind them. I'm like, it's the same kinds of things I would bring. And here's these people who I don't speak their language. I don't live in their country. We have a very, very different life in many ways. and yet we care about the same little things within our lives. And so I think that that's one of the gifts of reading in general, is we can learn something or learn an approach about something within a book that then we can translate that into my actual physical, tangible life. And so, so especially as Annie Beth said, if you're doing this within your family or reading this together with your family, like, you can make that transition and help your kids see that transition. Okay, so this was 100 years ago, but now, let's look at the family down the street that, comes from a different country, or whatever the difference might be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I've been thinking a lot about this concept too, like the value of reading old books. And, the concept of trying to get a modern writing voice is something I definitely resonate with, because I've noticed in my own writing, I've had to kind of adjust, like switch the narrator. Like I had a third person and I had to make a first person. I had to make the voice a little edgier, all these hoops you need to jump through. But I get the feeling that the fact that so much of your writing was shaped by older books, I get the feeling that makes your writing better. Like if you had only read, contemporary books, you'd have one slice of what it means to be a good writer. But reading all these older books with very different styles, very different conventions, I think that just broadens your horizons. And I think it just makes you better as a writer. And honestly, I think it just makes you better as a reader too, because there are things that older books can give you that modern books just can't. It's a way to see through the eyes of someone who lived in a totally alien time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
It's time travel.
Yeah, exactly. Like how many other times can you enter the thoughts of someone who lived hundreds of years ago?
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading I'm midway through this book right now, so I can't officially recommend it, but so far it's great. This book called Washington Black, and it takes place in the early to mid 1800s, story of an escaped slave in the West Indies. It's great, but all the viewpoint of the world is told through a modern author, because it was written just a few years ago. And that's still great. Like, the author does a fantastic job. But if we could get it through someone who experienced it, and there are slave narratives like that, that's all the more valuable, because the people who actually went through it. It's one of y'all mentioned just being able to make these connections with people from different times. And that's one of my favorite things to do when I'm reading, just seeing folks from different centuries who are so different from you, like, oh, I get that part at least. Yeah, we have that in common. And I think that things like Understood Betsy will really be helping along that route. I'm guessing there's a lot of connections with that you think readers will find in Understood Betsy.
I think so. I definitely think so.
Yeah, so now we're kind of winding down. So I don't want to put y'all on the spot. So we can say, give all these caveats, we're still nothing's set, nothing's definite, all this stuff. But I was wondering what other books you were considering for maybe being next in line for Bandersnatch Classics. And we could go through the criteria, because, I get the feeling I have a lot of listeners who are very well read in these sort of books. So if any have them in mind, which ones should they be thinking of?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of criteria, thinking about in the public domain, and you can check that. Usually my simplest way of checking that is go to projectgutenberg.com and see if the book's there. And if it's there, it's in the public domain. So public domain is the number one criteria, probably for families more than just for grownups, would be the secondary. And then again, that off the beaten path, like something that you're not going to be easily able to find at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, I was really excited to find out that Winnie the Pooh went into public domain this year. But we can't really do Winnie the Pooh because there's already a lot of them.
There
are a lot of Winnie the Poohs. Yeah.
And they're good.
They are. I mean, some things stay classic for a reason. But, but in terms of ideas we're throwing around of future books, Matt, I'm going to ask you a question on your podcast. Let's interview you.
Oh, turning the tables.
If I say the name of the author Frances Hodgson Burnett, do you have any titles that come to mind?
Oh my gosh, that sounds familiar. Frances Hodgson Burnett. Oh my gosh. I get the feeling you're going to say something that they wrote, and as soon as you say it, I'm going to go, oh yeah, of course. But it is not coming to mind right now.
Yes, well, she wrote The Secret Garden.
Oh, doggone it. Oh.
Yeah. I know. I'm sorry. I put you on the spot.
My wife's going to be so embarrassed.
She also wrote A Little Princess, which is probably her other most well-known book. She also wrote 2 other books. One of them is called Little Lord Fauntleroy. And that one I find is sort of known in some circles. But then she has a book called The Lost Prince that it is rare that I meet a person who's heard of this book. And it's probably my favorite of her books. And so we are actually first off, I discovered after having read this book over and over again for like 5 or 6 years of my growing up, the version I was reading was an abridged version. I had no idea that, that it was. And so we went back, we found a first edition of it, and we're reading through that and evaluating, like, is that a good option for this mix? Because, I have these fond memories from childhood, but we also want to keep in mind the culture that we live in, and, and we don't want to, we want to explore and expand ideas, but we also don't want to unnecessarily promote things that, we wouldn't want to promote as Bandersnatch Books. And so, so we're reviewing the books as we consider them, but that's definitely one that's on the short list as we're considering. Have we talked about other ones?
I think we kind of talked about looking at the Ambleside online list and going down the list and seeing which books people reported having trouble sourcing. Or that they didn't have great copies of. That was kind of our first list that we're going to make.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really good books on that list. There's the living books that are wonderful. There's a reason they're on the book list. They have been vetted by many, many people.
It's true. But I think the best way to suggest books to us is, through our website. There's an email us link. You can do that there. We also have on the website a patronage program for Bandersnatch Classics. Here's the thing. Even books in the public domain cost money to print.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise. So we do have a patronage set up for that. It's a donation. It's basically kind of like a GoFundMe, but it's just through our site. There's no extra fees being charged by anybody for that. But people can donate, $10, $100, whatever somebody's able to. And that just helps us build up a fund for the print run. And then, we're hoping that it begins to build on itself. And so then future books, can come out of the proceeds of the Bandersnatch Classics. But anybody who is a patron, we're going to be sure to list their name in the book and in the set rather, and, kind of honor our patrons who help us bring these books to life.
Awesome. Well, again, I'm putting the message out to all my listeners here. I know for a fact that there are a lot of you who read a lot of these old books, have some really good opinions, and can make some good recommendations. And I don't know, maybe that would mean they thank the Anselm Society, or maybe me personally. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas. But at any rate, I am really excited about this project. Like I said, I think this is a great idea. And also, once again, if you haven't already, please visit Bandersnatch Books. They have a lot of great stuff coming out. For those of us, I know a lot of us writers or just like folks who are readers, it is easy for us to complain. Shocking, I know. But it's easy for us writers to complain about, the publishing market and how all this good stuff falls through the cracks. This is the sort of thing that catches the stuff that falls through the cracks and brings it to the light. And it's such a great thing that they're doing. So every single one of you, Carrie, Rachel, Annie, Beth, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciated your time.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Thanks.
It's been a joy.
And as y'all can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The customers are trundling home, you've polished off your final glass, and the fire is down to embers. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Visit us at anselmsociety.org if you want to find out more about us. And until next time, I'm Matt Melma. Thanks for joining us.